something nobody tells you about 1975. The biggest artists of the year, Earth, Wind and Fire, the Bee Gees, Barry White, they were everywhere. Radio, TV, everywhere. But in between all those household names, there were dozens of artists who had one moment, one perfect song. A few weeks at the top of the charts, a radio station playing their record in every city in America. And then, nothing. Some of them had been grinding for 15 years to get there. Some of them stumbled into their hit completely by accident. One of them wrote his song in under an hour because he was running out of studio time and couldn't afford to waste it. And at least one of these songs became so embedded in American music DNA that 30 years later, it powered one of the greatest rap singles ever made. You've heard the sample 1,000 times. You just never knew where it came from. These are 15 one-hit wonders from 1975 that you forgot existed. And once you hear their stories, you will never forget them again. 1. Van McCoy. The Hustle. Van McCoy didn't want to go to the club. He was too busy. It was the spring of 1975, and McCoy was working late in a New York recording studio, finishing an album he wasn't even that excited about. His business partner, Charles Kipps, kept telling him about this new dance happening at a club called the Adam's Apple on the east side of Manhattan. A Latin line dance developed by Puerto Rican teenagers in the Bronx that was taking over every nightclub in the city. McCoy kept saying he'd go later. He never went. So Kipps went without him. And when he came back, he dragged two dancers right into the studio at midnight to show McCoy what they were doing. McCoy watched them for a few minutes. He loved it. He said it reminded him of ballroom dancing.
Do the hustle! Do the hustle!
People actually moving with each other instead of just shaking next to strangers. He sat down at the piano and wrote The Hustle right then and there. The following day, with 1 hour of leftover studio time, he recorded it with a group of the most in-demand session musicians in New York. Drummer Steve Gadd, bassist Gordon Edwards, guitarist Eric Gale, keyboardist Richard T. Players so good, they later formed their own band, Stuff, just so they could keep playing together. The Hustle hit #1 on both the Billboard Hot 100 and the R&B chart simultaneously on July 26, 1975. It won the Grammy for Best Pop Instrumental Performance. And it launched a nationwide dance craze so powerful that a New York Times reporter compared it to what Chubby Checker's Twist had done in the early 1960s. New York schools started teaching the hustle in physical education class. Van McCoy spent the next few years trying to follow it up and escape the disco label he had accidentally given himself. He never made another hit that came close. He died of a heart attack in 1979. He was 39 years old. The song he wrote in an hour because he was too busy to go to the club outlived him by 50 years. 2. Leon Haywood. I Want to Do Something Freaky to You, 17 years. That is how long Leon Haywood had been working in the music industry before his one genuine pop hit arrived. He started playing piano at age 3 in Houston. As a teenager, he backed blues legend Guitar Slim on tour. In the early 1960s, he moved to Los Angeles and joined Sam Cooke's band as keyboardist, and was there when Cooke was killed in December 1964. He recorded for Fantasy, Imperial, Columbia, and MCA. He had minor R&B hits. He wrote songs for other people. He built a career that was solid, respected, and completely invisible to mainstream pop radio. In 1974, he signed to 20th Century Records, and everything changed. I Want to Do Something Freaky to You arrived in 1975 and climbed to #7 on the R&B chart and #15 on the Billboard Hot 100. It was a mid-tempo slow burn, synths, wah-wah guitar, Fernand Haywood's silky voice reading something that was simultaneously smooth enough for the radio and suggestive enough that everyone in the room knew exactly what he was talking about. The song became a template. It was sampled on over 60 recordings. The most famous was Dr. Dre's Nothin', but a G-Thing in 1992, the opening single from The Chronic, one of the best-selling rap albums of all time. In the film Straight Outta Compton, the movie depicts Dre discovering that riff spontaneously on a keyboard. In reality, he lifted it directly from Leon Haywood. Dre's album even misspelled his name in the credits, listing him as L. Hayward. Leon Haywood never had another top 20 pop hit. He died in his sleep in April 2016 at the age of 74. The song he made in 1975 was playing on speakers across Los Angeles before they buried him. 3. Tony Camillo's Bazooka, Dynamite. Tony Camillo was a slightly overweight, balding Italian-American record producer in his late 40s. He had arranged Midnight Train to Georgia for Gladys Knight and the Pips. He had worked with some of the biggest names in soul music. He had never been anywhere near a hit record with his own name on it. Bazooka was his studio band, a rotating group of session players, not a real group with members or a tour bus or any intention of performing live. And Dynamite was built around the catchphrase of J.J. Evans on the hit CBS sitcom Good Times. The exclamation "Dynamite" that actor Jimmy Walker had turned into the biggest comedy punchline on American television. The song has almost no lyrics. It has explosions, it has whistling, it has a synth line that sounds like a spaceship preparing for liftoff. And it has a groove that could make a parking lot feel like Studio 54. Dynamite hit number 10 on the Billboard Hot 100 and number 6 on the US dance chart in the summer of 1975. It was sampled by Gang Starr nearly 20 years later on their 1994 album Hard to Earn. Tony Camillo and Bazooka never charted again. They never really tried. Camillo went back to producing other people's music, which was what he was extraordinary at. Dynamite was a novelty, a lark, a moment of pure commercial inspiration that nobody planned and nobody could repeat. It remains one of the most purely joyful records on any 1975 playlist, made by a man who had no business having a hit and walked away with one anyway. 4. Discotheques and the Sexoletties. Get Dancin'. He crashed his car, he was drinking too much. He had moved from New York to Hollywood, and Hollywood had no idea what to do with him.
I'm your man of the hour.
And then Bob Crew took him in and told him he could have a hit record. Sir Monty Rock III was born Joseph Montanez Jr. in the Bronx in 1939. His parents disowned him for his homosexuality. He became a hairdresser, a brilliant one, styling models and socialites, famous for being fabulous before the word meant what it means now.
I'm turning myself on.
He appeared on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson so many times in the 1960s that he became a fixture, a guest who wasn't exactly a performer but was absolutely, undeniably, something. Bob Crew, the same songwriter and producer who co-wrote Lady Marmalade and worked with the Four Seasons, took Monty in, gave him the persona of Discotheques, surrounded him with a group of session vocalists called the Sexoletties, and recorded an album where crowd noise was overdubbed throughout to make it feel like a live revue in a packed club. Get Dancin' hit number 10 on the Billboard Hot 100 and number 8 in the UK in late 1974, cresting through early 1975. Its follow-up,
Get down, really good. Get down to Puerto Rican rock and roll soul. Oh yeah.
I Wanna Dance With You, hit the top 30 in America and the top 10 in Britain. Monty Rock III appeared in Saturday Night Fever in 1977 as the DJ in the club, one of the great cameos in disco cinema. He later said the two songs sold 7 million copies worldwide, and he never saw the money from most of it. He became an ordained minister in Las Vegas. He died on February 23, 2026. He was 86 years old. The man who was famous for being famous outlived almost everyone from his era. 5. Hamilton Bohannon, Disco Stomp. Before Hamilton Bohannon ever made a record under his own name, he was Stevie Wonder's drummer. And after Stevie, he was Motown's touring band leader. The man responsible for keeping the live shows of The Temptations, Marvin Gaye, and the Supremes running with military precision night after night on the road. When Motown moved from Detroit to Los Angeles in the early 1970s, Bohannon stayed in Detroit. He formed his own ensemble using members of a local funk band called the Fabulous Counts, including at various points guitarist Dennis Coffey and a young Ray Parker Jr., who would later write and record the Ghostbusters theme. Bohannon signed to the Dakar label, started releasing albums, and built a reputation in the developing disco and dance underground that never quite crossed into mainstream pop. Disco Stomp changed that in the summer of 1975. At least in the United Kingdom. See where it hit number 6 on the singles chart and spent 12 weeks in the top 40. In America, it remained a club staple without ever fully cracking the pop chart. The song's heavy, thudding bass accent and relentless kick drum were deliberately designed for a dance floor. No frills, no ballads, no compromise. Just rhythm built for a body that wants to move. Bohannon never had a mainstream American pop hit. His most successful US R&B single, Let's Start the Dance, came in 1978. He died in April 2020 at the age of 77. Jay-Z sampled him. Snoop Dogg sampled him. The Tom Tom Club name checked him in Genius of Love. And Disco Stomp, the song that made his name in Britain, remains one of the great forgotten floor shakers of the decade. 6. Esther Phillips, What a Difference a Day Makes. She had her first #1 R&B hit in 1950. She was 13 years old. The record was called Double Crossin' Blues. It was her first single. And it went straight to the top of the chart. Before she was old enough to drive, Esther Phillips was already a star. And then the hits dried up. And then heroin took over. And then she checked herself into rehab in Lexington, Kentucky, in 1961, and while she was there, a pop star named Kenny Rogers heard her singing at a nightclub in Houston, Texas. He was so impressed he personally called his brother's record label and insisted they sign her immediately. She dropped the little from her name, became simply Esther Phillips, and had a country soul hit with Release Me that went top 10 in both the pop and R&B charts. And then the label went broke. And she signed to Atlantic. And the heroin came back. And she got dropped again. And she fought her way back again. By 1975, Esther Phillips had been fighting the music industry and fighting herself for 25 years. Rolling Stone had just named her Best R&B Singer of 1974. She recorded a disco version of a jazz standard originally popularized by Dinah Washington. Accompanied by guitarist Joe Beck, with the Brecker brothers on horns at the legendary Van Gelder studio in New Jersey. What a Difference a Day makes hit number 20 on the Hot 100 and number 6 in the United Kingdom. It was, by some distance, 7. Minnie Riperton, Lovin' You. The song was written as a lullaby, not for an audience, not for a record label, for a baby. Minnie Riperton and her husband, Richard Rudolph,
Made my life so beautiful, and every day of
had developed a habit of singing a soft, wordless melody to calm their infant daughter to sleep. That daughter was Maya Rudolph, who grew up to become one of the most celebrated performers in Saturday Night Live history. If you listen to the very end of Lovin' You, past the fade, you can still hear Minnie whispering her name. Years Stevie Wonder was under contract with Motown Records,
because you're beautiful, and every day of
which meant he was legally prohibited from producing for another label. But he so badly wanted to be involved with Minnie's music that he credited himself under the pseudonym El Toro Negro, Black Bull in Spanish, a nod to his Taurus star sign, in order to secretly co-produce the track for Epic Records without technically breaking his contract.
grow old, and we will live each day in
The result was one of the most sonically bare #1 hits in the history of the Billboard Hot 100. Minnie's voice, an acoustic guitar, a soft keyboard, birdsong, no drums, no bass, no percussion of any kind. Music historians consider it one of the very first chart-topping singles ever recorded without a single rhythmic instrument.
that you bring. Stay with me while
It hit #1 in April 1975, and Minnie Riperton became, briefly, the most recognizable voice in America. She had a 5-octave range that allowed her to glide effortlessly into the whistle register, a vocal space most trained singers cannot reach even once. The following year, she was diagnosed with breast cancer. She kept performing.
that you bring. Stay with me while
She became a national spokesperson for the American Cancer Society. She died in July 1979 at age 31. She never had another top 40 pop hit. Her daughter Maya was 7 years old when she lost her mother. The lullaby they sang together is still playing somewhere right now.
la 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 la. Doom, doom, doom.
8. David Ruffin. Walk Away from Love. He had been the lead voice of the Temptations during their greatest recordings. My Girl, Ain't Too Proud to Beg, I Wish It Would Rain. When David Ruffin sang, something happened that went beyond technique. A raw, desperate ache that made every ballad feel like a confession, and every up-tempo track feel like a man barely holding himself together. Motown fired him in 1968 for erratic behavior, chronic lateness, and an ego large enough to require its own tour bus. He showed up unannounced at Temptations concerts for years afterward, walking on stage uninvited, expecting the crowd's love to carry him past his professional disaster. His solo career was uneven and frustrated. Several labels, several attempts. A voice that everyone in the industry acknowledged was extraordinary. Attached to a personality that made it nearly impossible to get consistent work. To Walk Away from Love was written and produced by Van McCoy, the same Van McCoy who wrote The Hustle, riding the peak of his 1975 creative momentum. The song hit number 9 on the Billboard Hot 100 and number 1 on the R&B chart. It was David Ruffin's only top 10 pop hit as a solo artist. His performance is devastating in the way only Ruffin could manage. Controlled grief, the voice never breaking, the emotion enormous. The follow-up singles failed. The momentum stalled. Sir David Ruffin spent the rest of his life cycling through addiction and partial comeback. He died of a cocaine overdose in 1991. His funeral was attended by Michael Jackson. The voice that had defined a generation of soul music got one perfect solo moment in 1975, and then the world moved on without him.
To keep walking out the door.
9. The Ritchie Family. Brazil. The Ritchie family had no members named Ritchie. They were 3 black women, Cheryl Jacks, Gwen Oliver, and Cassandra Ann Wooten. Assembled by Philadelphia producers Jacques Morali, and Henri Bololo to record a disco concept album. Their name came from Lionel Richie, who had nothing to do with the project. The producers simply thought the name sounded good. Brazil was not a new song. It was a 1939 samba written by Brazilian composer Ari Barroso. Recorded and re-recorded hundreds of times over the following decades. Morali and Bololo took its iconic melody, stripped it down to a Philly soul disco groove, had the Ritchie family sing it with propulsive energy, and watched it hit number 11 on the Billboard Hot 100 in the summer of 1975. The song introduced millions of Americans to the sound of Philadelphia's production style, while simultaneously being a remake of a Brazilian song recorded before any of them were born. The Ritchie family went on to have more dance hits: Best Disco in Town in 1976, American Generation in 1978. But Brazil was their moment of genuine crossover pop magic. Jacques Morali went on to create the Village People the following year. He used the same blueprint, distinctive personas, up-tempo grooves, Philly production values, to build one of the most commercially successful acts in disco history. The Ritchie family were a proof of concept. Brazil was the prototype. 10. Label, Lady Marmalade. 3 black women in silver space-age costumes descended on New Orleans in 1974 and recorded a song about a French woman working on the street. And in doing so, they became the first black group in over a decade to hit number 1 on the pop chart. Label were Patti LaBelle, Nona Hendrix, and Sarah Dash, a trio who had started out as a girl group in the early 1960s called the Bluebells. They then reinvented themselves progressively until by the mid-70s they sounded like nobody else in music. Theatrical, political, futuristic, and completely unwilling to be marketed as a conventional soul act. Lady Marmalade was written by Bob Crewe and Kenny Nolan, the same team behind Disco Texas' Get Dancin'. It was recorded in New Orleans with legendary producer Alan Toussaint. Patti LaBelle later admitted in interviews that she had no idea what the French chorus meant when she sang it. So she didn't find out what "Voulez-vous coucher avec moi ce soir" meant until she asked Crewe directly. Her reported response was, quote, "What will my mother think?" The song reached number 1 on both the Billboard Hot 100 and the R&B chart in the spring of 1975, replacing My Eyes Adored You by Frankie Valli, another Crewe composition.
She said, "Hello, hey Joe, you wanna give it a go?"
At the top spot. That made Crewe and Nolan only the 3rd songwriting duo in Billboard history to knock themselves out of the number 1 position, after Lennon and McCartney, and Holland Dozier Holland. LaBelle disbanded in 1976. They had one more album after Lady Marmalade and couldn't agree on a direction. As a group, as this specific incarnation, they were a one-hit wonder on the pop chart. Lady Marmalade was inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame. It was preserved by the Library of Congress. It changed what 3 black women were allowed to look like and sound like on a pop stage. That is not bad for a song whose lead vocalist didn't know what the hook meant. 11. Ace. How Long? Paul Carrack wrote, "How long about a woman who was cheating on him?" He wrote it as a direct question. How long has this been going on? And didn't bother dressing the accusation up in metaphor. It was personal, immediate, and completely clear. Ace were a British rock and soul band who had built a following on the pub circuit in England, playing a style of music that didn't fit neatly into rock, soul, or pop. Or How Long reached number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100 in the spring of 1975. Making it a far bigger American hit than it ever was at home in the UK, where it peaked at number 20. American radio loved the warm organ groove, Carrack's weary delivery, and the directness of the song's emotion. Ace never had another American hit. The band broke up in 1977. But the careers of its members spread wide across popular music in the years that followed. Now, Carrick sang the lead on Tempted by Squeeze in 1981. He was a founding member of Mike and the Mechanics and sang the lead vocal on The Living Years in 1988. Guitarist Alan King played with Free. Drummer Fran Byrne recorded with Eric Burden. The band that made one American hit dissolved into a dozen careers that collectively touched tens of millions of records across the following decades. How long was the beginning of all of it? A song about heartbreak and betrayal that turned into the most unlikely transatlantic crossover of 1975.
But I can't help but have my suspicion.
12. Jigsaw, Sky High. The song was written for a Bruce Lee film. That is where it starts. Sky High was composed by Des Dyer and Clive Scott of the British band Jigsaw for the soundtrack of the 1975 martial arts film The Man from Hong Kong, an Australian-Hong Kong co-production that cast martial arts star George Lazenby alongside George Lazenby. The film was a mid-budget action picture. The song was an afterthought, and then it became the year's most unexpected international hit. You Sky High reached number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100 in late 1975. It hit number 9 in the UK. It charted in Australia, Japan, and across Europe. The melody, bright, ascending, impossible to forget, turned an obscure film tie-in into a genuine pop anthem that sounded absolutely nothing like the rest of Jigsaw's catalog. Des Dyer and Clive Scott reportedly wrote the song in roughly 2 hours after being given a brief by the film's producers, and they later said they barely remembered writing it. What they produced is one of those pure pop moments that sounds effortless because good pop always does, and because the hardest thing in music is to make something that sounds this simple and has it actually work.
I thought that we had made it to.
Jigsaw never had another top 40 American hit. They released several more albums in the UK with moderate success. Sky High remains their only contribution to global popular culture. It has been covered by dozens of artists and used in films and advertising for 5 decades. It was written in 2 hours for a Bruce Lee movie that most people have never heard of. Music works in strange and wonderful ways.
Why did it have to stop? You've blown.
13. Walter Murphy and the Big Apple Band, a fifth of Beethoven. He took the opening 4 notes of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, the most recognizable musical phrase in Western classical history, and turned them into a disco record. Walter Murphy was a pianist, arranger, and composer who had spent years writing music for commercial jingles and television before he attempted this particular experiment in 1975. The arrangement took Beethoven's iconic da-da-da-dum motif and built a full orchestral disco production around it. Strings, brass, rhythm section, the works, transforming a 19th century symphony into something that belonged in a nightclub. The record was an instant sensation. A fifth of Beethoven hit number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in October 1976, but it was recorded and building momentum in 1975. It appeared on the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack in 1977, which introduced it to an entirely new global audience and gave it a commercial afterlife that most #1 singles never receive. Murphy later said he was terrified the classical music establishment would condemn him. Instead, several musicologists wrote approvingly about how his arrangement demonstrated genuine understanding of Beethoven's harmonic language, rather than simply lifting a melody. Whether they meant it or were just being polite, nobody could say. Walter Murphy never had another top 40 pop hit under his own name. He became a television composer, most famously writing the incidental music for Family Guy, which has been on the air since 1999. The man who turned the most famous symphony in history into a disco record spent the following decades writing cartoon music, which is somehow exactly right. 14. Gallagher and Lyle. I Wanna Stay With You. Benny Gallagher and Graham Lyle were Scottish songwriters who had spent years writing songs for other people. Hits for Manfred Mann, recordings for Paul McCartney, sessions that built a career without ever generating one for themselves. Their 1976 album Breakaway produced I Wanna Stay With You, a song with the warm, unhurried quality of something written by people who were no longer in a hurry to impress anyone. It reached number 6 on the UK singles chart and crossed into the American market. Where it earned moderate pop and adult contemporary attention. Their creative partnership dissolved not long after. Graham Lyle went on to co-write What's Love Got to Do With It for Tina Turner in 1984, the song that became Turner's signature hit, her return to commercial relevance, and one of the most recognizable pop songs of the entire decade. One member of a forgotten 1970s duo became, quietly, one of the decade's most consequential songwriters. His name was in tiny print on one of the biggest records of 1984. I Wanna Stay With You is a song without a single wasted note. It is unhurried, confident, and completely forgotten by everyone except people who loved it at the time. This is exactly what one-hit wonder status does. It takes a perfect thing and buries it underneath its own commercial footnote. 15. Freddie Fender, Before the Next Teardrop Falls. Freddie Fender had already been famous once. In 1959, he had a regional Tex-Mex rock and roll hit. Was signed to Imperial Records and was arrested in Louisiana for marijuana possession. A judge sentenced him to 5 years in Angola State Penitentiary, one of the most brutal correctional facilities in the United States. He served 3 years. When he got out, nobody in the music industry wanted to touch him. He spent the 1960s working as a mechanic in the Texas oil fields. He picked up gigs playing local bars at night, driving to work in the morning. For nearly 15 years, music was something he did on weekends in Texas dance halls, not something that was going to make him famous again. In 1974, producer Huey Moe signed him to ABC/Dot Records and recorded Before the Next Teardrop Falls. A country soul ballad with a Spanish verse that reflected Fender's Chicano heritage. It hit number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 and number 1 on the country chart simultaneously in the spring of 1975. Making Freddie Fender one of the few artists in chart history to top both the pop and country charts with the same song in the same week. He had a second hit that year. Wasted Days and Wasted Nights, which reached number 8, and a few more country crossovers before the momentum slowed. He became part of the Tex-Mex supergroup the Texas Tornadoes in 1989 and continued performing until illness slowed him down.
And if he ever leaves you